In 1985, programmer Tim Ansel put his skills to work in the video game world, making games for a host of obscure computing systems. And by 1987, he thought he had gained enough experience to start his own company in his native England. So in August of that year, Tim Ansel founded the Creative Assembly, which had one employee, Tim Ansel. In the beginning, his ambitions were modest. The company mostly made ports of already released games for other platforms. Even while simply transferring code from one system to another, the fledgling studio found time to add in some additions and enhancements that broke new ground and changed expectations. But little did they know that after 10 years of forgettable work, they would accidentally develop one of the most influential, innovative, and beloved strategy series in history, and plunge the world into total war. After doing a few ports in the 80s, they drew the attention of Electronic Arts, who asked the company to port their very first FIFA title to the PC. For this version of the game, Creative Assembly invented what has become a staple of sports games today: interactive commentary from a real-world announcer, in this case, Tony Gubba. This success led to a long line of EA Sports ports. Because these were all established games with gameplay mechanics already complete, they were both cheap and simple to produce while earning lots of money for the young developer. What was more, large team games required the Creative Assembly to create their own PC engine, one that was optimized for huge numbers of AIs operating simultaneously. Looking at that engine, they wondered if they couldn't try it out in a different game style. Only a few years earlier, Command & Conquer had arrived on the scene and popularized the real-time strategy genre. Creative Assembly saw that their engine could quickly create a cheap CNC knockoff and decided to go for another low-budget, low-risk title. And so in 1998, they unwittingly began work on the game that would forever define their company. Early on, they decided that setting their title in feudal Japan would give it a unique flavor that would set it apart from their competition. They worked hard and got pretty far along in their Japan-set CNC clone. But right around this time, 3D graphics cards were coming into prominence. Initially, no one at the company thought a 3D RTS would be feasible. But they decided to run a quick test and built a 3D map that could be played in. To their own shock, it worked brilliantly. Suddenly, they recognized that their cheap Command & Conquer clone had the potential to reinvent the wheel. Feeling ambitious, they decided to go for it. The switch to 3D had several consequences. First, it brought the camera down to the general's viewpoint. This in turn meant that it wouldn't be possible to see the whole map at once. The player couldn't see over hills, and he would have to constantly check his sides and rear for flanking attacks. This in turn meant that the mechanics and tone of the game naturally started to drift away from traditional RTSs and towards authentic military strategies. This, in turn, meant that the battles themselves became much faster than a traditional RTS level. As such, Creative Assembly knew that they needed something else to give the game a longer lifespan, and also to make the player care about the battles. The result was the Campaign map, a turn-based economic game reminiscent of the Civilization series. Players had to carefully manage the cities of their empire in order to raise and then maintain a powerful army. This army would then go forward to conquer neighboring cities, or defend their own cities against foreign invasion. There had been games with realistic battles before, though they had been severely set back by technological constraints of the day. They suffered from poor graphics, and even then, from poor frame rates. 3D games of course existed, as did turn-based Empire games. But no other game before this one had ever combined all of these elements into one seamless package. As this all started to come together, one day the guys at Creative Assembly realized that their quick, cheap project was taking on a life of its own. They had the opportunity now to make something truly first-rate, so long as they didn't rush it. So they bit the bullet and decided to give the project a much bigger budget and schedule than initially conceived. With the extra money, the crew of computer programmers started researching Japanese history and even hired a local professor to act as an advisor on the project. They also used the extra development time to introduce the general system. Each army would be led by a general. The more battles this general won, the more powerful his army would become. Conversely, if he lost a few battles, his army would become less effective, and if he lost too many battles, he would commit noble suicide. Also added to the mix were non-combat units, spies, diplomats, and assassins, that could interact with other factions to help the player win the game without unsheathing their swords. On top of all this was the morale system. Each individual unit in the game would simulate troop morale based on a number of factors: casualties taken, relative position, previous experience, and so on. Highly motivated troops would defeat otherwise equal opponents, while poorly motivated troops would fight feebly, and could even panic and run away. Whereas other strategy games put you in complete command of an army, this would be the first to simulate disobedience in the ranks. Combined with the realistic mechanics of the combat, it meant that the gameplay revolved not around killing the enemy's troops, but disorganizing them.
My homeland has been a battleground since before my great-grandfather carried his sword into battle.
You have been betrayed by the cowardice of your Taisho. He is fleeing from a honorable death.
In June of 2000, Shogun Total War at last released to critical praise and an awestruck gaming community. Its blend of turn-based strategy and real-time tactics proved to be an addicting combination. Gamers around the world tested their mettle against each other online, while the Grand Campaign mode was good for dozens of hours at least. The high-risk project, that had began life as a low-risk clone, became a landmark in strategy gaming. It proved that the Creative Assembly didn't have to make boring ports anymore. They could stand on their own 2 feet as a respected developer. A sequel to Shogun was feverishly expected. But after the expansion pack Mongol Invasion a year later, the Creative Assembly announced that they would not be returning to the Asian theater. Rather, they'd be bringing Total War to their own backyards. Tune in next time to see how Creative Assembly went from samurai to knights.